Hello! I'm here with a book tag. This is like my first proper sit down in front of my bookshelf video I've done in a really long time. So, I'm sorry for anyone who likes those videos and doesn't like the reading vlogs, but I like the reading vlogs. And since hardly anyone watches my videos anyway, I'm doing what I like. But I do like doing tags sometimes, and I found one I wanted to do, so let's do it. So I am doing the Read Your Country tag. And the first question is, what country are you going to be talking about? Canada. I also want to preface this by saying that I actually had to do research to answer these questions, which I feel like is not a good thing. Just throwing that out there. What is your favorite childhood book from your country? I have 1.5 answers for this, I guess, because the first one that I wanted to say was Purple, Green, and Yellow by Robert Munsch, which is the one with the super and dull will never come off until you're dead, or maybe even later markers. But then I found out that Robert Munsch was not born in Canada and did not grow up in Canada. He is Canadian, and he's not American anymore. He's just a Canadian citizen, which is great. But it's not the same. Like, I don't know if that makes me, like, evil for saying that, but it's not the same. Whenever, first of all, there's hardly any famous Canadian authors or Canadian books or anything, and then one of the most famous ones didn't even grow up in Canada. I feel like it stings a little bit. So then my other book that I picked was Red is Best by Kathy Stinson. That was one of my favorite books when I was little, and you know, I'm not sure if that's why my favorite color is red, or if I liked it because my favorite color already was red. Couldn't tell ya. But it was a very cute book. What is a book from your country that you read in school? I did a lot of research, I thought about it real hard, and I couldn't think of any. Yep. Some people read The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood in high school, but it wasn't required reading. There was, like, usually in certain English classes there were certain books that you could choose from that you wanted to read. So there was, like, you know, Ray Bradbury and Margaret Atwood and other literary people. Where was I? Margaret Atwood. Was Margaret Atwood required reading for you, or was it like you could read her if you wanted to in high school, or was like everyone was like, okay, now we're gonna read like The Handmaid's Tale?
Not gonna lie, I don't really remember the things that I had to read.
Alright.
Probably because I just read the Coles notes.
Alright, were any of them
I read
Canadian?
Wuthering Heights, hated
Not
it.
Canadian. I would have hated it also.
Great Gatsby, hated
it.
Frankenstein,
Hated it.
hated it. What are you doing?
Anyway, Margaret Atwood was, in my high school at least, was never a specific required reading. She was usually among authors that you could pick from when you could pick your own books. Usually you couldn't just pick any book you wanted. You were given like a list
Isn't
that you
it
could
true
read
that
from.
Margaret Atwood was a drug addict?
Well, probably. Have you read Oryx and Crake?
I tried. Not really my cup of tea.
Yeah, me neither. I don't think I read any Canadian books in high school, or books that took place in Canada, or books about Canadian authors. It's not a thing. Which I feel like should have been, like, a unit of some kind in one of my English classes, you'd think. What is a book set in your favorite area of your country? Or a book that's set in a place you'd like to visit in your country? Again, not a thing that's happened to me. Any book that I have read that takes place in Canada is very subtly taking place in Canada, I guess. Like, it doesn't really mention anything about anything specific, so you wouldn't know that it took place in Canada, except for, like for example, The Nest by Kenneth Opel. I'm pretty sure it takes place in Canada, because there's one part where it mentions that the kid went to the CN Tower once. This book, Bye Bye Evil Eye, this takes place in Toronto and Greece. It's about people who travel to Greece and then they come back and they live in Toronto, and they mention Timbits in it. So that's pretty cool, I guess. But that's it. I haven't read Anna Dressed in Blood takes place in Thunder Bay, I think. But here's the thing. It takes place in Thunder Bay in a Canadian high school, but it had still a lot of Americanisms in it and didn't have any Canadianisms at all. They mentioned distances in miles instead of kilometers, and they had study hall instead of spare. Is that the same thing? Although spare, you don't have to go study, you just don't have a class. I feel like the only thing that was Canadian about the high school in this one is that there was no homecoming. They had a semi-formal. So that was disappointing. And Thunder Bay is not like a place that I feel like I need to go visit or anything. So I haven't read a book that takes place in an area of Canada that I want to visit, or my favorite area of Canada. Nothing that happens for me. What is a historical fiction book set in your country? I'm so happy I have one for this. The Boundless by Kenneth Opel. This takes place in whatever year trains were popular and planes were not. Anyway, it travels across Canada, which is cool, but it basically takes place on a train the whole time. So, but it does mention Canada and Canadian cities. So that was exciting for me. What is a book by an Indigenous author from your country? Wenjack by Joseph Boyden. I have not read it, but that is one. And I knew that. I didn't have to do research, I just couldn't remember the author's name. I knew the book Wenjack was by a Canadian Indigenous author. What is a classic book from your country? I have one. Anne of Green Gables! I tried reading it though, and I got past the first paragraph, and that was it, because the first paragraph was one sentence. So I'm probably not going to be reading this. But this takes place on Prince Edward Island, and I used to live in PEI, which is exciting, and we used to go to Anne of Green Gables' house all the time because my dad is a retired RCMP officer, and he was one of the RCMP Mounties who would be in his Red Surge on a horse at Anne of Green Gables' house for people to take pictures with. So sometimes we'd be like, let's go visit your dad at Anne of Green Gables and take pictures on his horse with people. And what is a book from your country that you haven't read but would like to read? A Book of Spirit and Thieves by Morgan Rhodes. This is an urban fantasy book, so it takes place in a fictional world and also in Canada, in Toronto. So that's exciting. That, I'm not gonna lie, is one of the only reasons I bought it. I heard that half of this book took place in Toronto, and I did read the first bit and I did like it, but the only thing that bugged me was that I can't remember what word they used, but it was a word that has a U in it in the Canadian spelling, and it did not have a U in it in this, which is, if you're gonna have a book take place in Canada, why can't you keep the spelling? Like, I don't get it! What are some of your favorite authors or books from your country? Kenneth Opel. He wrote these books, but he also wrote Silverwing, but Silverwing's about a bat, so there's no, like, specific country mentioned in that book. And here's the thing, too, where it gets, like, Eric Walters, I feel like is a bit of a hit and miss for me. Some of his books I really enjoy, and some of them I don't. But most of his books take place in the United States. Besides the mostly inaccurate Anna Dressed in Blood, I have not read a YA book that takes place in a Canadian high school. I would love to read a YA book that takes place in a Canadian high school where they don't have night football games that the whole town goes to, and they're not this big spectacle, and where people can be on the football team or the rugby team or the soccer team and also be in band or drama. Or I would also love to read a YA book where not every single 16-year-old has a car, because that's impossible most of the time because you can't drive by yourself yet when you're 16. I would love to read a YA book where they have a spare in grade 12, and that they don't use words like freshman or sophomore or what are the other words? Junior and senior. I would love to read a book where there's no such thing as a junior prom. It's just a prom, because prom is for the people who are graduating. If any of you have read a YA book that takes place in a Canadian high school and is accurate, please let me know, because I would love to read one, and because I have still not found one. I mean, maybe there's some high school taking place in this book, but I haven't read it yet. But again, there shouldn't be one book There should be multiples to choose from. Pretty much all of the books on my shelf behind me, all the YA ones, all take place in American high school where they use terms that I don't understand, and you would think that with all the YA books that I read that I would understand them by now. Some things still confuse me. Because there are a lot of things that exist only in the States. Anyway, that's all for my tag. I'm not going to tag anyone, because no one ever does the tags when I tag them in them anyway, so...